interior forest economy is in a state of crisis as companies with surplus manufacturing capacity aggressively compete over a declining fiber supply. Starting in 2002, the annual allowable cuts, the AAC, in affected timber supply areas was significantly increased to encourage the harvest of timber impacted by the mountain pine beetle, resulting in the subsequent construction of several super mills in the interior forestry region. Between 2002 and 2004, the AAC for the Prince George Timber Supply Area, the TSA, was increased from a historical harvest level of 9 million cubic meters to 14.9 million cubic meters. It was during this period that the government of the day eliminated the practice of appurtency, a legal requirement that Crown Forest harvesting rights be linked to a specific, often community-based processing facility. Further to this, clauses in the Forest Act intended to discourage the transfer of tenures and maintain diversity in tenure holdings were either significantly diluted or removed. The corresponding consequence of the increased harvest levels and liberalization of tenure transfers was to allow the creation of oligopolies in the BC forest sector. The decade of 2000 to 2010 saw geometric growth in the size of both sawmills and companies. Through a rash of mergers and acquisitions, the industry has consolidated to where the majority of harvesting rights are held by two major publicly traded multinational corporations. While some would have argued that with the increased supply, there should have been enough wood to go around, and that local economies would not suffer from these major policy changes, such has not been the case for the community of Fort St. James. Up until 2009, Fort St. James had 4 operating sawmills. Today we have 1 medium-sized stud mill. A second medium-sized mill is scheduled to begin construction this spring. In 2009, our residents watched Stewart Lake Lumber, a major employer in the community for over 70 years, be sold and demolished, with the 202,000 cubic meters that was previously milled locally now being trucked to a distant super mill. The cumulative impact and where we are today is that over 2.2 million cubic meters of manufacturing has been lost to our community over the past 11 years.
That's enough wood to run the Plateau sawmill for an entire year. To put it in perspective, a single super mill consumes in the magnitude of 2 million cubic meters annually, or approximately 36,000 loads of logs, or approximately 1 every 10 minutes of operation. In 2015, Conifex Timber was permitted to sell a portion of its renewable forest license of 200,000 cubic meters, again with no local processing requirement. This wood is also now milled by a different remote sawmill, providing no benefit to our community. 4 out of 5 loaded log trucks currently pass through Fort St. James on their way to distant sawmills, and to add insult to injury, few of the contractors logging in our area and very few of the truckers hauling from our area call Fort St. James home. The Prince George TSA is one of the largest management units in the province, with a current annual allowable cut of 8,350,000 cubic meters, or approximately 13% of the entire provincial AAC.
Blocks A, B, and C around and northwest of Fort St. James, previously defined as the Fort St. James Forest District, are estimated to have, during the past 3 years, contributed between 40 and 75 million in stumpage revenue each year from an annual harvest ranging from 2.7 to 3.5 million cubic meters. Timber supply review modeling suggests that as much as 65% of the total Prince George TSA harvest will be supported by supply blocks A and B in Fort St. James in the upcoming years. The mountain pine beetle moved from south to north, and super mill construction never made it to Fort St. James. The Fort St. James mills relied upon their harvesting rights in their own backyard, never securing any substantial amounts of timber from the respective districts of the super mills. It's now the case that the hungry mills of the South are rapidly moving north to dine at the Fort St. James table. The offer of hospitality to secure dying pine from the South was never reciprocated, even during the peak of the beetle epidemic. The timber flow has been a one-way street. Our two local mills, Apollo Forest Products and the to-be-constructed Hampton Lumber Mill, currently have a combined AAC of 840,000 cubic meters. This means wood in the order of 3 million or more cubic meters will pass through Fort St. James each year to be milled elsewhere. Our community deserves more. Some of the last major stands of merchantable timber in our province virtually surrounds our community, and the message we are now being sent is that the pie is getting smaller and everyone's share will be smaller. As stated earlier, Hampton Lumber will be commencing construction of our second sawmill this spring, and quite simply, our community cannot risk cancellation of this project due to a reduction in their renewable forest license to a level that places the economic viability of the project in doubt. If Fort St. James was located in an area that had effectively been logged out, a position that many interior communities, including Vanderhoof, now find themselves in, it would only be fair and reasonable to expect our community to share the pain, so to speak. The situation in Fort St. James is exactly the opposite. Blocks A, B, and C of the previously defined Fort St. James Forest District will be the primary source of fiber in the Prince George timber supply area for many years to come, and quite simply, the residents of Fort St. James and Nacosly-Wooten band members are entitled to a more equitable share of this resource.
Mayor and Council of the District of Fort St. James and Chief and Council of Nacosly-Wooten have had extensive consultations on this matter, and on March 9, 2021, the District of Fort St. James passed the following resolution for inclusion in their submission to the Minister of Forest, Lands, Natural Resource Operations, and Rural Development, Katrine Conroy.
Whereas the District of Fort St. James Council and Nacosly-Wooten Council have worked together in the past on projects that are beneficial to both communities, whereas we support a strong, healthy, sustainable forest industry in the Fort St. James region to sustain our communities for the long term, and whereas both councils in good faith are working towards a positive reconciliation process to improve our relationship with each other, be it resolved that we support the Ministry of Forest and Natural Resources changing forest legislation and policy to protect the timber resource in the Fort St. James Forest District for the benefit of our municipality and First Nation communities in the following ways. That legislation to protect small communities in assuring that timber resources harvested in the Fort St. James Local Forest District remains in the area for local lumber manufacturing be reinstated. That BC Timber Sales annual allowable cut be reduced and redirected towards the innovative value-added sector to provide for more employment in Fort St. James region. That First Nations be participants in changes to forestry legislation and policy to ensure that we can work with our partners on long-term plans to sustain a healthy working forest. Mayor and Council of the District of Fort St. James specifically request that the annual renewable cuts for Hampton Lumber and Apollo Forest Products be designated for local lumber manufacturing and remain unchanged in the current apportionment process. The 402,000 cubic meter area licenses that were sold unrestricted in the past be reinstated and reserved for the establishment of an innovative, value-added local production facility in partnership with Nacosly-Wooten. First Nations and community-based tenures to be increased. If our community's significant loss of logging, trucking, and milling jobs during this period were not enough, we have also suffered a significant loss in the number of employees working from the Fort St. James Forestry Office since the two districts were amalgamated in 2009. This amalgamation was prompted by the Vanderhoof Forest District fully logging their blocks D and E, and in the process effectively eliminating the need for a forestry office in Vanderhoof. Instead of making the correct business decision, move the workers to where the work is, a political decision was made to combine the two districts to mask the fact that all of the wood was in the Fort St. James area and almost all of the forestry workers were and still are in Vanderhoof. The main sales pitch for the amalgamation was that the Fort St. James and Vanderhoof forestry offices would be operated on a more or less joint, equally shared basis. Can anyone say, by any measure imaginable, that this is even remotely the case today? The Fort St. James Forestry Office is a Potemkin village with only a handful of workers in the building at any time, while the Vanderhoof Forestry building is, well, let's just say, complete. There were at one time over 70 full-time workers in the Fort St. James Forestry Office. When asked why there are not more workers in the Fort St. James Forestry Office now, the response was, new hires choose to live in Vanderhoof. I'm actually quite shocked to learn that there are forestry workers out there who don't want to live near a forest. Can no one see the irony in this? I suspect, however, that Vanderhoof is chosen because A, employees are given a choice, or B, only the Vanderhoof office offers any prospect of career advancement. Whatever the reason, staffing levels at the Fort St. James Forestry Office can no longer be permitted to languish at the embarrassingly low levels they are today. This is unacceptable and grossly unfair to our community. We herein request that a full review of the structure and operation of the Stewart-Nechako Forest District be conducted to determine the current staffing operational resources at each location, and that the district manager be tasked to prepare a defined, clearly measurable, and regularly reviewed action plan with an end goal of achieving equalized staffing levels between the Vanderhoof and Fort St. James Forestry offices. My presentation has up to now been Fort St. James specific. However, the elephant in the room is the incredible economic and political power that two major multinational companies, have over our entire industry. In the Prince George timber supply area, one of those companies, Canfor, already controls 61% of the total renewable cut. 61%. I'll let that sink in. And they fully expect to increase that percentage by purchasing new First Nation fiber allocations as they become available in the future. At what point will we change the name of the Prince George Timber Supply Area to the Canfor Timber Supply Area? Canfor simply cannot be permitted to buy more, period. They have more than enough volume to unduly influence downstream and upstream markets, including suppliers, contractors, log and chip supply. Canfor was a responsible corporate member of our community until 2009 when it sold its Fort St. James sawmill. The Canfor that is returned, however, in no way resembles the socially responsible and community supportive company they once were. They are now a ruthless, ROE-driven multinational bully that invests almost exclusively internationally and shows little regard for the wants and needs of small communities. They have unlimited financial resources, enough to outbid every regional and local operator for the diminishing fiber supply. And if left unchecked, this will put many of these operators out of business. Canfor's motto was last man standing, and the current direction of the interior forest business model would suggest that this could very well happen unless a wholesale restructure of the industry is undertaken. The industry is at a historical crossroad, and tweaking the system just won't cut it this time. The supermill concept has served its purpose. There is not enough wood to go around, and we must now ensure that local production is protected, or entire communities will disappear. The mountain pine beetle's voracious appetite for wood has been replaced by the voracious appetite of the supermills. Unless legislation to ensure that timber resources harvested in the local forest district remain in the area for local manufacturing is reinstated, small community sawmills are at a significant risk of closing. Ill-conceived changes to government policies are what caused the current untenable situation our forest industry now finds itself in, and only the unwinding of these policy failures will get us out of this mess. The super mills will all eventually close one by one as their available timber supply disappears. So the only question we need to ask is, will there be any local production left when that happens? We are setting ourselves up for the same outcome as the East Coast fishing industry unless we immediately prioritize our remaining fiber resources. First priority, small community local production as determined on a community-by-community basis. Second priority, First Nations distribution. Third priority, BC timber sales. Fourth priority, licensees. Apportionment should be allocated in reverse order, and the major licensees should experience a substantial cut to their quotas to induce them to implement plans to systematically reduce their production volumes. My apologies to Samuel Taylor Coleridge, author of The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. In Fort St. James, it is not water, water is everywhere, but trees, trees everywhere, for everyone but us. Fort St. James is a forestry town within one of the last major stands of merchantable timber in the province, and the people who live here have every right to expect that they should be active participants in the harvest of this resource. Previous government policy decisions have not been kind to our local economy, and the loss of local government office worker jobs is salt added to the wound. The creation of a 402,000 cubic meter license area reserved for the establishment of an innovative value-added production facility in partner with Nakazi Wuten would go a long way to right past wrongs and would provide the employment opportunities that band and community members need during these difficult and challenging times. Respectfully submitted, Bob Motion, Mayor, District of Fort St. James, March 2021.